Okay, so I have a question for you. Do you think that people will trust these signs? Like, because now I think there's this trust issue when it comes to sensors or technology that tracks us. That like, yeah, we will delete this absolutely, and we won't take a photo. But like, do people trust that, or are people more like, yeah, like skeptical, as you said you were?
I mean, I think the establishment of trust will be really important for the success of any kind of standard. In the research we've done and in the people we've talked to in the cities where we've deployed, people tended to trust. Actually, I was even surprised. These were projects run by the municipalities. So it was sort of dependent on how trustworthy the municipality is. That tends to be one of the most trustworthy levels of government in the world. Anyhow, people tend to have more trust in their municipality than higher levels. But it will be absolutely important that this is not, and this is where the question of governance becomes really important, that if you see a signage that looks like that, right, if it becomes a global recognized signage, that it was audited to a certain level, that you can trust that in fact it was, the way that you might have stamps on devices for certain levels of safety, right? There's a clear sense that this was researched. So I think at that level is where it will need to go, so that like the example I shared, that it looks like a camera, but it's not actually recording you. We'll need that kind of sort of regulatory structure. At the moment, it's very much opt-in right now. It's really, we are, even ourselves, trusting the people that we talk to as we sort of develop a data chain. But it'll certainly need to be more rigorous.
I have a I have a completely different question for Johan. I'm currently in the midst of trying to convince a variety of Dutch national governmental organizations to move from their, let's say, private software to a more open source solution. What are, in your opinion, the best arguments on that? Their current, it's a very much a lock-in argument from their part. We use, it's Geo software, so we use Esri. We can't go to the open source systems. And the consultants brought in are all, like me, very much open source based. What are, in your opinion, best ways to get these governmental organizations to move to a more open source system?
Is it working? Okay. When I talk to different municipalities across Europe, it's all about providing a business case, because you're fighting against a more proprietary, traditional, conservative procurement acquisition culture. We're talking about trust. There is trust towards what's already there, to the context that you're already talking with, and there's less trust to something you don't know anything about. Open source software, open source, that's scary. And then you hear about these things about like vulnerabilities coming in. What about these licenses? That's something legal. Let's not touch that. Typically, it's in the company side, it's the legal department saying no. In the public sector, I come across it's typically the security people saying no, because they are afraid of what the open might bring in. So it's really about explaining the business case. Often cost efficiency is one of the aspects, but it's also about the sustainability in knowing, having access to your data long term, being able to, even in 30, 50 years time, being able to use the data that you store in an open file format, so it's not locked into a specific vendor that might go bankrupt in a year or so, whatever. So it's also about explaining the risks. So about, if you have a scale, you have the plus and the minus, and you really need to contrast them together to build a business case. So really demystifying the myths is as much as building the potential, because these are the things that you need to tackle in order to gain the benefits.
Hello, thank you all very much. I also have a question for you, Johan. Is there currently any platform of like networking or finding collaborators if you want to kind of pursue an open source project or contribute to changing your how your industry works? How do you find like-minded people?
There's a lot of communities, so I helped co-found something called NOSAD, Network Open Source and Data in Sweden, 4 years ago, mainly focused on the public sector perspective, sharing knowledge in terms of open data, open source software, and that's a great place to enter. And also you have the Open Data Community Forum in Sweden. So those are natural places, and there are platforms like Foundation for Public Code internationally, and also a lot of different more civic tech, and there's a lot of open source solutions coming up addressing the SDGs. We recently had a conference at the UN headquarters focusing on how open source can be addressing different humanitarian aspects and so on. So if you just go in and scratch the surface, there's typically a community for everything. So it's depending on the use case you want to address.
I have a question for Violet. If I'll ask you a question, Violet. When you imagine spatial computing, have you explored what the both business model might be to have signs or projectors everywhere, in which how would companies actually put that out there, and then the access model? So I come into a space and there are these signs or these touch screens that I could project my thing to. How does that work?
Yeah, the first business model, the thing we've been thinking about is just starting kind of small with the world that exists today and the problems that are more like immediately felt by the types of things we're doing. So we've been focusing a lot about remote work and these kinds of interactions. And so we're trying to start with just, the everyday problems that someone might have while doing remote work. I get screen fatigue. I don't want to look at the screen, and I'm using multiple applications at the same time. So how do I, that might be like selling someone more individually, still like a more individually based model to start, where it's like, okay, with a projector and a computer, we'll just give you an assistant that allows you to connect any set of devices and control spatial displays with speech, stuff like that. So that's kind of where we imagine starting. I think with the invention of any new type of technology, you always kind of have to start closer to what people are somewhat familiar with, so that it's not too much of a jump. But then like going in, I do think it presents a hurdle, because like going into a new city that has screens everywhere and saying like, no, like, let's just project, instead of the transit station having a separate screen, we actually want to like project the routes and pathways directly on the environment instead. It's just kind of a different, they're probably thinking maintenance. They're like, this isn't usually how we do things. And even if it's ends up being more technically simple in the end, it's just something new. So I think we kind of have to start somewhere else first, perhaps. But then the access model, I think that could be, anything from just using, even the same way if anyone has, has used the location services on something like an iPhone, like the Find My iPhone kind of thing. You can do kind of geofencing things that say, hey, when I get home, do this. So I imagine that there would be a much more like public digital layer that, can tell where we're at and what kind of local network we're joining. But I haven't fully thought through like how that would be structured at a like mega level. Not there yet, I guess.
Ooh, thank you very much, Violet, Jonathan, and Johan for making us smarter in thinking about smart cities.